Good afternoon, church, and welcome to Wednesday night Bible study. As far as I know, there aren't any kind of updates or anything to give, so we can just go straight into it. And I want to let you know I've been thinking a lot about Jesus's phrase where he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That's just something that came to my mind several days ago, and I decided I wanted to go back and find where that was in the scriptures and try to really understand the passage where Jesus said it. Because, as intuitive of a phrase as that sounds, a lot of times when you go back and actually look into something deeply in the Bible, you find out it's different than what you thought it was, or maybe it's mostly the same, but it's just way deeper than you realized. So that's what I wanted to do with that specific phrase. And I began reading, it's found in John chapter 8, so I read John 7, 8, and 9 just to kind of get a feel for what was happening in that section. And I came to find out that that phrase is just one part of a long and complicated debate between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day. And as I was reading, I actually found out several other things that I wasn't even thinking to ask. And one of those things is exactly what I want to look at with you tonight. So we won't actually even get to that phrase. It's farther than where we'll go, but what we're going to talk about will help you get to that point if you decide you are like me and want to go look into it on your own after this. So we'll be in John chapter 7, right at the beginning of the chapter in verse 1. And it says, "After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He did not wish to go about in Judea because the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. Now the Jewish festival of booths was near. So his brothers said to him, 'Leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one who wants to be widely known acts in secret. If you do these things, show yourself to the world.' For not even his brothers believed in him. Jesus said to them, 'My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world can't hate you, but it hates me because I testify against it that its works are evil. Go to the festival yourselves. I'm not going to this festival, for my time has not fully come.' After saying this, he remained in Galilee. But after his brothers had gone to the festival, there he also went, not publicly, but as it were in secret. The Jews were looking for him at the festival and saying, 'Where is he?' And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds. While some were saying, 'He's a good man,' others were saying, 'No, he's deceiving the crowd.' Yet no one would speak openly about him for fear of the Jews. About the middle of the festival, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. The Jews were astonished at it, saying, 'How does this man have such learning when he has never been taught?' Then Jesus answered them, 'My teaching isn't mine, but is his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there's nothing false in him. Didn't Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps it. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me?' The crowd answered, 'You have a demon. Who's trying to kill you?' Jesus answered them, 'I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs. And you circumcised a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Don't judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment.'" Okay, so if you're like me, the first time you're reading through this, you might be thinking something along the lines of, what is Jesus even talking about? First we're at a festival, and then all of a sudden we're at the temple talking about circumcision and the Sabbath, and it's really hard to even tell exactly what point Jesus is trying to make with his argument, much less what he was talking about before the argument. So just so we can clear all that up and get an idea of what this is saying, in case you're in that boat, we'll just walk through it slowly and get an idea for what's happening. The first thing we can see in this passage is that there is a clear divide in the crowd because of Jesus. We have one group that says, yes, he's a good man. What he's doing and saying is right and it's true. And we have a second group who has the opposite view, and they believe Jesus is actually deceiving everyone and just leading them all astray. So Jesus goes into the temple, both of these groups following him, and we're going to need to know just a little bit of background info on these people before we can understand exactly what they're talking about here. So first things first, Jesus and everyone there with him were Jews, which means they were God's covenant partners. These were the people in the Old Testament that God had chosen to join in a covenant partnership with him, which means that they were given a lot of laws or instructions on how to follow that covenant. One of these laws was keeping the Sabbath, which means basically that on the Sabbath, which is the last day of the week, you're supposed to do no work and just rest. Every week they did this over and over. The last day of the week, no work, just rest. It was embedded into the way their whole society ran. Now, earlier in the story, Jesus had healed a man on the Sabbath, and that is exactly what the Pharisees and the other religious leaders were so upset with him for. In their minds, they believed they knew God's will, which was, don't work on the Sabbath, therefore don't heal on the Sabbath. So to them, Jesus was actively breaking God's law and indirectly encouraging other people to do the same. Jesus disagrees, and he has an answer for them. He says, anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there is nothing false in him. So what is Jesus saying here exactly? Well, in his mind, it's quite clear that what he is saying and doing is what's right in the Lord's sight. And he even believes that anyone else out there who wants to do the will of the Lord will just know that what he's doing is right. And as a matter of fact, he also believes anyone out there who's disagreeing with him and believes he's just leading others astray, those people think that way because they're too blinded by their own self-interest, their own status, appearance, whatever, what he calls their glory. They're concerned with their own glory, not the will of the Lord. And that's pretty clear. That's easy to understand. But then we start talking about circumcision and the Sabbath. And that's where it can get a little foggier because we need a little bit more background information to get exactly what he's saying there. So not only did the Jews have the law of the Sabbath where they can't work on the last day of the week, they also had another law of circumcision, which is, just to put it simply, on the 8th day after a male child is born, you have to circumcise that child, 8 days after they're born. But here's the thing. What if that 8th day happens to fall on a Sabbath? What do you do then? Circumcising a child is work. So you can't do both. You have to choose to keep one law and break the other. If you circumcise the child, you break the Sabbath. If you keep the Sabbath, you can't circumcise the child. And evidently, the Jews had come up with a general rule for that so that there could be an exception for it. They decided if it happened to fall, that 8th day, if it happened to fall on a Sabbath, you could circumcise the child. You could break the Sabbath to fulfill the law of circumcision. Evidently, in their minds, it was more important to circumcise a child on that 8th day than to keep the Sabbath. So now what Jesus is saying is, if that's true, if it's okay to break one law to fulfill a more important one, if that's okay, if that is not breaking the Lord's will, then it should be absolutely okay to heal a man on the Sabbath. Because to Jesus, it's clear that it's more important to the Lord that that man be healed than for the Sabbath to be kept. The religious leaders completely disagree. They, like Jesus said before, are too blinded by their own self-interest, their own motives, their own will. and they cannot see what the Lord's true will is. They think they know it, but they're blinded and they don't. And take a look at what Jesus said at the end there. Don't judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. In other words, don't do what makes you appear to be righteous. Do what is actually righteous. Think back to that duality in the crowd Jesus described earlier. There are people who are concerned with their own interest, and there are people who are concerned with the Lord's interest. The people concerned with themselves are going to do what makes them appear to be righteous, to look good, to have that, whatever. It's selfishly motivated. But the people who want to do the Lord's will do what's actually righteous. There will not be self-interest in their hearts. They will do what is right in the Lord's sight because they honor and trust the Lord. Think back to what Jesus said earlier. Why do these religious leaders despise him? Like he said at the beginning of the chapter, the world hates me because I testify against it that its works are evil. Jesus, by doing what's right in the Lord's sight, is exposing how corrupt and self-interested these religious leaders really are. It's no wonder they want him to quit talking. And that becomes their game plan from this point on. The rest of all of chapter 7 is continuing this debate between Jesus and the religious leaders, with them plotting more and more ways to trap him in his words and silence him. And we could go through all of that, but we'd be here forever. And so for the sake of time, we're going to skip ahead to the beginning of chapter 8 to see where this whole debate is heading. All right, this is chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "Then each of them went home, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All of the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman who had been caught in adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?' They said this to test him so they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, 'Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her.' And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, sir.' And Jesus said, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin again.'" So they're going forward with their plan to shift the spotlight back onto Jesus and expose him as the one who's really corrupt. They find a woman who is cheating on her spouse, and they drag her out, bring her straight to Jesus, and ask him, "How should we handle this situation?" According to their God-given law, what they were supposed to do is stone that woman, execute her for her crimes. And now they decide, one of two things is going to happen here. Either Jesus is going to agree with them and validate their interpretation of the law, which is what he's been against this whole time, or he's going to disagree. And by disagreeing with them, he's going to disagree with God's law. And that is going to be enough reason for them to charge him and take action against him. But what does Jesus do? He sits down and he starts writing in the sand with his finger. Now, there are a number of things that might imply, but based on the context of this chapter, there's one really compelling thing that I think this might be alluding to. Think back to Deuteronomy 9:10. It's Moses speaking, and he says, "And the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets written with the finger of God. On them were all the words that the Lord had spoken to you at the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly." That passage is referring back to when Israel met the Lord at Mount Sinai, when they first established their covenant with him, and he gave them the laws. I think it's quite possible that this little detail of Jesus writing in the sand with his finger is an allusion back to the Lord writing the law with his finger on the stone tablets. And what would that imply if that's the case? Well, Jesus, as God become human, knows the intention of these laws better than any other person in the room because he's the one who wrote them. And what is his point to these people? Just like in his mind, it must have been more important to the Lord for that man to be healed than for the Sabbath to be kept. Now he believes it must be more important to the Lord for this woman to be shown mercy and spared than for that law of her execution to be followed. And how can he believe that if it's so clearly written in the law that anyone who commits adultery is to be executed? Why is he so dead set on saying, no, it's more important to spare her? Well, it's because Jesus knows, as the author of those laws, that just like how the law of circumcision supersedes the law of the Sabbath, the law of mercy supersedes the law of judgment. If the leaders really knew God's will, they would know that, but they don't. Ironically, it's these people who are so concerned that Jesus is deceiving people, they are the ones who are actually deceived. They think they know the Lord's will, but they have no idea what it is. In their minds, this woman deserved death for her crimes. And the law even says the same. But for Jesus, it's clear that mercy must triumph over judgment, any self-interest, or any person's will. Now, today, in our modern day, 2,000 years later, there are still many people, like the leaders in Jesus' time, who have been deceived into believing that the Lord would have them to hate and judge rather than love and forgive. That just isn't true. Could Jesus be more clear in this passage about that? Anything in us that leads us to hate and judge needs to be called into question. Did those leaders think they were wrong? No, they were convinced that they were right. But that doesn't change the fact that they didn't really understand the Lord's will at all. It can be tempting to take the reins into our own hands and give people the consequences that we think they deserve. But is that what the Lord would have us to do? Think about what Paul says in Romans 12. Don't repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. I went into these passages looking for the answer to a completely different question, about a completely different thing, the Lord said. And yet I couldn't help but see this staring me in the face as I was reading through it. All of this to say, if you've been holding hatred or judgment or whatever against someone in your heart, and you've found a way to justify it in your head, I get it. We've all been there, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for us to stay there. If that's where we are, we need to consider that maybe the Lord would have us to forgive and love and show mercy, even if that person or those people really are guilty and they really did do wrong and we suffered at their hands. It doesn't matter. Not to the Lord. The woman we just read about was guilty. It's clear she was guilty. She was caught in the very act. But does that change Jesus' mind about showing that woman mercy? No, because here's the thing. This is just how it is. People aren't going to change because we were harsh enough or passive-aggressive enough or judgmental enough that it's pushed them into changing their heart and changing their behavior. That's just not how it works. People are going to change when they experience the love and forgiveness and mercy of the Lord. Is that not what transformed each and every one of us? As Christians, everything we have, every good thing that we have it because someone showed us mercy and gave us grace. Why would we not be spreading that out freely to everyone else so that they could be transformed in the same way we are being. Just think about it. All you can count on giving people what you think they deserve to do is just making it worse. Two negatives don't equal a positive. It just makes the whole thing worse. Let's not be deceived by our own selfish motives like these people who think they know God's will. Let's not be opposed to the will of the Lord. Let's be just like Jesus in this passage and realize and fully internalize the fact that love and mercy and forgiveness triumph over the law of judgment. I just want to ask you today, if that's where you are, please turn around, ask the Lord to forgive you for your own hard heart, and ask Him to soften it so that you can do as He would have you to do for the sake of yourself and for the sake of everyone else around you. And I'm not saying any of this to be all holier than thou or whatever. I'm saying this because this was very convicting for me. I cannot tell you how many times I have given people the consequences that I thought they deserved. And all I've ever seen that do is make the whole thing worse. What I have never regretted is showing someone mercy. The Lord makes sure to remind me every time that the greatest command is to love. And if I can't forgive other people, just like Jesus says in His model prayer, if we can't forgive other people, why would we expect the Lord to forgive us? It's not about us and what we think is right. It's about the Lord and what He knows is right. Imagine if Jesus had treated us the way we sometimes treat people who we see as having done us wrong. Do you think He would have died for our sins? Do you think He would have given us His Spirit to transform our hearts? Absolutely not. Because we don't deserve either one of those things, but we have them because we have been shown mercy despite our wicked selves. I hope and pray today that if you're in those shoes, as I have been many, many times, don't just keep going that way. Listen, if you have ears to hear what the Lord's will is. Repent of it, turn around, and follow in His footsteps. We need to be the people that the Lord was for us. So all of this, just to say to this one point, we need to put away our own self-interest, just like Jesus did when He took our sins on the cross. And we need to show just pure love, grace, and mercy as much as we possibly can. That's not an easy thing to do. I'm not at all trying to say that you can just flip a switch and that'll come naturally to you. It hasn't worked that way for me yet. But when you're walking closely with the Lord, when you're walking by the Spirit, as Paul would say, that fruit just begins to naturally spring out of you. And the more we do it, the more natural it becomes, and the easier it is to continue doing. So, that's all I have. And maybe one day we'll figure out what Jesus meant by "you'll know the truth and it will set you free." But for today, I just want us to really consider that any judgment, any hatred, any anger in our hearts probably doesn't need to be there. And maybe it's time that we surrender to the Lord. So, thank you for listening. God bless you, and have a great night.